The last thing that we did was we went through Space Marine legions and understanding the different legions out there to get a kind of an idea of what makes them different from each other. Is it their Primarchs? What do they specialize in? And it kind of just left more questions than, like, it didn't really answer as much as I would like to. It just more like generated more questions and more things I really wanted to dive into more. So today I kind of wanted to watch like a variety of videos that I feel would complement the lack of knowledge I have in these areas, hopefully with some other YouTubers and creators that have insightful videos on the questions that I might have. There are three things that I kind of want to watch today. One will be a Leutin video, which goes into Space Marine creation / recruitment. I had a whole bunch of questions about that when I watched the Space Marine Legion video. Like, where do they come from? What qualifies them to be a Space Marine? How long does it take to make a Space Marine? And a whole bunch of other questions like that. So I figured this creator has been recommended quite often. We've never watched a Leutin video. I figured he would be a really good place to start on apparently becoming an Astartes. So we'll get to learn a little bit more about that. And that probably will generate a whole bunch of other questions for me as well. With that, let's start off, I would say, with the beefiest video that we have today. And we're going to be watching Space Marine creation / recruitment by Leutin, your guide on becoming an Astartes. This is what I really want to know about. As always, feel free. Teach me anything I don't know. Let me know what you're thinking. I will have a lot of hypothetical questions and theoretical questions, but that's just a norm for me. I yap sometimes. Let's watch then. Let's do this. I'm excited just because this person has been highly recommended. In the grim darkness of the far future, there's only war. Ah yes, the preface of everything. Warhammer 40k. Maybe! You're right, he might have a copyright strike.
They shall be my finest warriors, these men who give themselves to me. Like clay I shall mould them, and in the furnace of war I shall forge them. They shall be of iron will and steely sinew. In great armour I shall clad them, and with the mightiest weapons they shall be armed.
The Emperor of
They will be
Mankind.
untouched by plague or disease. No sickness shall blight them. They shall have such tactics,
Unless
strategies, and machines that no foe will
Nurgle
best
has
them in
something to
battle.
say about that.
They are my bulwark against the terror. They are the defenders of humanity. They are my Space Marines. And they shall know no fear.
I guess they do make the perfect, like, soldier
Space
in that
Marines are
sense.
humanity's most elite fighting force. They're the defenders of civilization, but their immense power is forged through a harsh selection process, extreme genetic and body modifications. This grueling transformation kills many recruits, and those who do survive it are left arguably barely human. The conversion from weak mortal to demi-godlike superhuman is one gifted to only a tiny amount of humans in the 41st millennium. An Astartes, when his transformation is complete, will be stronger, tougher, mentally more powerful by factors than an ordinary human. And while
So, isn't Astartes, like, dependent on the codex of Astartes? Like, is any Space Marine an Astartes? Like, is there, like, a looser, broader definition of what that means? Because I feel like now I'm becoming unsure of what Astartes really is. That's a long-winded way to say I want to make space daddies who will kick ass. Oh yeah. Astartes just means Space Marine. Adeptus Astartes. So Adeptus Sororitas is Adeptus Astartes. I didn't really know that that was the actual classification. I get it now. Okay, thank you for that.
a Space Marine's prime mission is to protect humanity, their physical disparity from ordinary common humans can actually leave many Astartes to look down on these lesser common humans,
Ooh.
while others will feel a renewed sense of dedication to protect those who can barely protect themselves.
So you got salamanders and you got the egotistical Space Marines. I don't like the fact that they do look down upon the others, because technically isn't their whole mission to like just serve the Emperor and like protect humanity and further it at all costs?
It's important to remember that Space Marines are the defenders of humanity and not the rulers of it. Humans, for better or worse, have been the leaders of the Imperium of Man until recently with the return of Primarch Roboute Guilliman. While the transformation of a human to Space Marine is complex, you'll often hear the terminology of a gene seed be used. Now, a gene seed is not literally a seed, but it is a specific organ that each Astartes carries with seed-like qualities.
Okay, that's answering some questions about what a gene seed is. Now I kind of want to know more, because I feel like that was the thing that I didn't really understand, like how it adapts, how it mutates and changes, and it seems like it's almost like a living thing.
It's a term used to describe generally the genetic material of an Astartes. It's more accurately the cells and DNA required to engineer a human into an Astartes.
So
the gene seed, more specifically though,
refers
to the Space Marines' progenoid glands, and the clue is in the name there when you think of progeny. These organs in a Space Marine respond to the other genetic implants they have and replicate DNA. Essentially, they are, in a manner of speaking, an asexual form of reproduction, which is why when a Space Marine is fatally wounded on a battlefield, an apothecary will fight to recover his gene seed. It's also why, yes, Space Marines do not require heterosexual reproduction.
I guess that's a benefit of them, because if you want them to be like a fighting warrior, you don't really want them to be concerned in the matter of progeny. Plus, I imagine it could create weakness in something that the Emperor wants to be like this like unbeatable force that will stand in harm's way and defend the entire empire to all means necessary. But I didn't know that an apothecary goes to retrieve the gene seed. So like that's like how important and vital this organ / like information is to make sure like you can create more. But I don't understand why retrieve it. Like, can you not make it again? Or is it like, is it like you grow it to a certain stage and then you can inject it into someone else? Or is it that you don't want the genetic material falling in the hands of the enemy? Like, I don't understand the exact purpose of going to retrieve it. They don't know how to make the gene seed. It's genetic information of their Primarch. So you have to have it to keep continuing making Space Marines, and they don't actually have the knowledge and the know-how to actually do it. Yes, it does seem efficient in the 40K's universe context too. Okay, so wait, who created the original gene seed? Was it the Emperor? Okay, the Emperor created the gene seed, and no one else knows how. Any gene seed lost in battle is never able to be replaced. So like, what if, but the Emperor is basically dead on a chair right now, right? So like, if let's say, I don't know, I'm not saying this is like gonna happen, but Necrons, right, find a way to like genetically target every Space Marine in existence and wipes out the entirety of like the gene seed, anyone embedded with the gene seed, then that's it. Game over? Like, you go and like, you basically nuke. Wow. I mean, that's what I would do if I was the villain of the Empire. Imperium of Man. I would just find a way to nuke the gene seed altogether and render it absolutely useless, and then, oh god. So you're telling me that pretty much, other than like the means that the Imperium Man has come about to this point, they are like actually useless at continuing their civilization if all is lost. So like, if we put someone from 2024 back in like early civilization, before like people knew how to start fires and make wheels and machinery and stuff like that, and you told that person to completely reinvent civilization and all the technology, and they're just like, I have no idea, I lived in this age where all this technology exists, but I don't actually know how to make it, then that person is going to be doomed, because they're going to have to like live out the entire natural progression of life again, or even just die out, because like we just simply do not have the information and know-how. Most Imperial gene seed has genetic flaws in it because I've used it for so long, it's slowly corrupted, like recording over a videotape too many times. Wow, that is very flawed. Can't they just like wake up the Big E from like the nap and be like, hey, can you like scribble down some notes on how to do this? Creating new things is forbidden. So it's the same with technology as well. You have to use an STC, standard template construct, like a blueprint held in a machine. Like a damn NFT to make approved Imperial tech. You lose that NFT, you can't make a new thing. That is such a big flaw to this entire like civilization and existence. Like our entire race could be dead as we know it on just that basis alone. That is a terrifying thought. Humanity lives in an age of tech stagnation by 40K. I didn't even realize that it was also like medical stagnation, like in that sense, but I guess there is tech that goes into medical advancements. Primark, we need more seeds. Can you make some? Wow. That is already an interesting learning. Hello, lit! Yellow guy, I'm almost complete, just trying out different shades to see what works best. And then you may not have to look at yellow for a long time. This is a relief, lit. That's why they have religious rites before a drop of a bomb to please the machine spirit. Okay. Alright. Let's continue.
5 years from implantation, a Space Marine's neck progeny glands can be harvested, but the chest glands won't be harvested up until 10 years.
You have
Space
different
Marines
glands
essentially
that can be
depend on
harvested at different
themselves
times?
to produce new Marines for the chapter. Lastly, in this general sphere of discussion, to answer a very commonly discussed topic, are Space Marines actually castrated? And then, how do they excrete waste? Well, I can't actually recall anywhere in written law this being noted.
That's a shame.
So if anybody has a specific point of reference, please do link it.
I'm
but
curious.
my speculation, based on a few things that I've kind of looked at, is that pretty much the canon opinion is that Space Marines have no sexual drive. However, when it comes to excretion, it's true that their armor is also an environment suit that would cycle and process their own waste, much like a still suit.
That's exactly what I thought. It would be much akin to Dune and how they also like filter their own like bodily fluids to make sure that they can continue doing what they do. That would make the most sense. It would be definitely efficient from that perspective. So also just like any Space Marine like legions that get corrupted by chaos are pretty much doomed then as well. I imagine, I don't know, would you want to go retrieve the gene seed of a corrupted Space Marine? Like chaos? I don't know if that would bode well. I don't know the extent of like corruption chaos has on like their organs. It's heavily implied in the backstory that gene fabricator Call uses heretic gene seed that has been held in the vaults since the heresy because it hasn't been used at all and therefore isn't corrupted, ironically making it more pure. That is very, very interesting. One Marine can produce several sets of gene seeds, so that's how they can refill their numbers without having to recover every single gene seed from fallen Marines. Okay, so you can have several sets. Gotcha. Probably wouldn't want to harvest a heretic gene seeds, though. Unless you really want to experiment, which could be cool.
In the Dune universe. Also, Space Marines do not live in their armor, although they may wear it for extended periods of time. It can be removed. It's entirely possible that their external genitals are removed and they have implants to take care of waste, but I've got nothing to see that it points towards this. So it's an unknown, but it's not something that's critically really important in the scheme of things. It's equally possible that it's just seen as an organ as with everything else and they just leave it all be.
Imagine that they would consider an organ like that to be vestigial and like not necessary, and when they're like crafting a Space Marine be like, yep, that's not needed, get that out of here. But honestly, to me, even though it's like not really necessary that they like write about this stuff, I think it's interesting. I think like if they actually did go into it in one of the books, you know, like that's fascinating information.
Now, before we look further into how a Space Marine is forged in the 41st millennium, let's remind ourselves how they were created over history. Now, the first form of Space Marine was originally created by the Emperor during the unification wars of the late 30th millennium.
Oh, okay, very early
Earth at this time was a
millennium.
barren wasteland of scavengers and barbaric warring tribes after civilization had imploded as a result of the Age of Strife. Earth, being cut off from its supply routes in the warp, cannibalized itself and fell into total anarchy.
I know we learned about the timeline and stuff, but it actually just blowing my mind away that it was like even as the 30th like century or 30k where like things started to come together for man. So like Would be really cool to see like the initial creation of the Space Marine.
After the Emperor originally created Techno-Barbarians, a crude adapted form of super soldier, he would form them later into the Thunder Warriors.
Ooh.
These warriors were brutal, powerful, and most importantly, highly unstable. The Emperor knew that he wouldn't be able to work with these soldiers forged in the fires of anarchy beyond the unification of Earth's warring tribes. And so he secretly constructed his genetic facilities in a fortress deep below vast mountain ranges on Earth. Here, he would, with some few remaining gene rights, create his Primarchs using his own genetic material as a template.
And this is
then subsequently, the very first of the new breed of warriors, the Space Marines, or Astartes. But what are the Thunder Warriors?
Yes.
Imperial records state that the Thunder Warriors were nearly all wiped out during a particularly bloody battle at the end of the Unification Wars on Mount Ararat. Conveniently, the new Legiones Astartes were created readily to replace them. Now, records from this time are understandably fragmented, but described eyewitness accounts from the few Thunder Warriors to survive this battle, like Eric Tyrannus, stated that it was in fact the Emperor himself who massacred the Thunder Warriors.
And that's what I was like thinking about the entire time, is like, that would be the most convenient thing in the world, that somehow all of them were wiped out. These like soldiers made from anarchy that he could not control. He didn't like them anymore. They were the test subjects, and it was him all along. Whether he had a hand on it or he orchestrated it, he just wiped them out. That's exactly what I was thinking this entire time. I was like, oh god, okay, he created something. He's not too happy about them. He's making something else. But what's he gonna do about his first men, his first soldiers? I wouldn't be surprised, honestly. It can be seen as unknown purpose from Big E. Yeah. Seems like there's a lot that's like speculation. Some Marines do have families. As such, it would certainly vary by chapter. If any chapter does take a celibate vow. Oh, I didn't actually realize that they could. So like, if let's say they did have families, is it kind of like in vitro fertilization? Because like, I'm imagining it's not going to happen through natural means, because I imagine I mean, I guess, did they specify that they don't have genetic data to like pass on, or that they're not sure if they have the organs or even the drive for that sort of desire, biological desire? I wonder if that, like, because you know how we like talk about like our biological desires are the things that keep us like persistent pests on this earth and keep us like propagating and continuing to live on, is like that desire to have children and sire and have families and things like that. I'm not saying that everyone's like this, but like that would be intrinsic also to the survival of humans, like wanting to do these things. Like if you remove this urge to want to do that, he must have really like messed and tweaked their settings to make sure that they still have that survival desire, just not correlated with like our, what we know as biological instincts. From prior to becoming a Space Marine, they're still born as regular humans. True. But we just don't know how they modify them during the process, I guess.
Others have stated that it was also in collaboration with his custodian guard. In several instances that occurred since this time, where Thunder Warriors have appeared and faced their Astartes brothers, the Thunder Warriors have nearly always managed to inflict casualties beyond expectation before they are finally felled. This gives some indication of how powerful they were as warriors, and why the Emperor felt they were perhaps too dangerous, given their power and psychological instability, to function as a disciplined fighting and defensive force for the new Imperium. Regardless, this whole situation is a dark and little spoken of episode for the Emperor of Man. Vocalizing these events would no doubt have some Inquisition or Ecclesiarchy on their way to you very promptly.
Don't ask
Thunder
questions.
Warriors killed in the Battle of Mount Ararat, the new Space Marines, the Legiones Astartes, would come to the fore. Unlike their Thunder Warrior forebears, they would undergo...
Is it me? Like, does this Space Marine have like bling? It could also be just like I don't know what they call them, like ammunition rounds for their guns and things like that, but it almost looks like he's decked out in like bling. I don't know. Something about this image.
Rigorous mental training, as well as physical and genetic modifications. This would give them immense physical traits, as well as being near unbreakable with their mental conditioning. The new Marines were initially segregated into 20 legions. This separation was not for simple organizational purposes. Each legion was imbued with genetic traits from their Primarch, and as such this impacted their character and behavior. To ensure unity, the Emperor designated them to stay together in their legions to reduce friction and ensure cohesion of the Astartes brothers. Through recruiting and conquest of human colonies, as the Imperium expanded, so did the Astartes legions. What had begun as a handful of Marines swelled to tens of thousands during the Crusades. This would lead later to heavy damage caused during the heresy after the Primarchs holding such immense power, being the sole commanders of each Space Marine legion. After that period of chaotic incursion, Roboute Guilliman, Primarch of the Ultramarines, would draft the Codex Astartes, and the remaining loyalist Primarchs would, after much consideration, agree at best that the Space Marine legions be split into chapters. This was to
I didn't realize that that was the defining moment where like chapters were made and it wasn't all based on the Primarch, because Primarchs can go rotten, as we can tell here. And I didn't realize it was Robert Gulliman, or however you say his name, was responsible for creating the Codex Astartes, which would then just help with this like top-down problem that they could potentially have. As far as I understand, Thunder Warriors were designed always to fail, a trial run to place a custodian in Space Marine power rankings. That's sad. That is definitely sad. Yeah, Rowboat Girly Man. Hey Arcani, it's good to see you. Hope you're having a good Wednesday, and good to see you as well, Bunny. This is probably Sacha Baron Cohen in disguise. You might be onto something.
To ensure no Space Marine Legion could wield the sheer weight of power they had during the Crusades and subsequent heresy. This was known as the Second Founding. Each of these chapters would take a permanent homeworld or fortress monastery in the Imperium. The Codex Astartes states that each chapter would be 1,000 battle brothers in number and manage its own recruitment. A specific development in the creation of a Space Marine was discovered after the Horus Heresy: weaknesses in the gene seed. Now, as I previously explained, the gene seed is the core biological component in the creation of a Space Marine. During the Heresy, Space Marines were created on a massive scale, and as with any biological replication process, if you do this on a large scale, then mutations and errors can occur in this DNA replication. So another result of
Wait, are we saying then like the issues with Horus were a corrupt gene seed, or was it that Horus was one of the Primarchs, right? So it shouldn't be that. I'm curious. Okay, I'm getting confused now. Unless it was corrupt all along.
The implementation of the Codex Astartes by Guilliman was to slow the process of creating a Space Marine, to more closely monitor their genetic material and the material implanted within new recruits to ensure purity and expunge defects. Guilliman would also establish core genetic banks on Terra to ensure a stock of genetics existed. These pure sources would
So if, like, let's say they retrieved a gene seed from the battlefield and it had, like, defects and stuff, would they just, like, toss it? Because I guess they're not, like, editing it because they don't have that technology. And then also just having a bank of pure gene seed. Destroy it. Okay. I mean, that's kind of the policy with planets as well, so. Horus was just a dick, yes, in our long story of which is the biggest jerk in this universe. I want to go and find who's the most impressive and the coolest Space Marine. That's also what I want to find. Like, who's the most badass of them all, you know?
Provide new material for the foundings of Astartes chapters and also prevent any further contamination.
Recruitments.
As previously described, each chapter is responsible for its own replenishment. It chooses where and how to locate potential Space Marine candidates. Many will recruit solely from their own homeworld, but others will reach out to hive worlds of the Imperium to locate powerful and resilient fighters who have shown promise and an unnatural ability in combat, even potentially recruiting from gang fighters in hive cities. Feral planet.
The way I see this is much akin to, like, you know, the recruiters that like go to like college and high school football games and they just like watch out for like who seems like talents and stuff like that. There's always people just like noting, like, yep, you're like, you look like to be one of the strongest warriors. You look like you're Space Marine candidates. So like when they come to these worlds, they're like, yep, I got a whole list ready for you right here. Take your pickings. To be fair, it wasn't the horse's fault initially. If he wasn't injured and taken to the Davenite Lodge, he wouldn't have fallen. Okay, I don't know the context of this, but I will take your word for it. It was only after these events Horus fell.
It can also be good for selection, as the humans here are physically tough and have to deal with daily hardships more frequently than some other Imperial.
It's like that one, sorry, I know I paused a little prematurely here, but it's like that one, I can't remember the Legion right now, where they have like kind of ashen skin and they just live in a harsh world. Like that one entire Legion itself.
Planets. Surprisingly, less recruits actually appear from the militaristic worlds like fortress planets, maybe because although knowing lives of military discipline, they haven't endured the true horror and hardships that come from the rougher ends of Imperial life. Any candidate for a Space Marine will be usually young, between the ages of 10 and 15 years old.
10
Obviously
and
they need to be
15?
strong, healthy and fiercely loyal to the Imperium.
How are you going to be strong at the age of 10?
Often on
and show
worlds where
tendency
recruitment
for
occurs,
combat?
young male humans who show exceptional skill or strength are pushed hard to give them the best chance of potential recruitment. Candidates can occasionally be as old as 20, but the full effect of their biological conversions may not be as effective or complete. Standard trials for Space Marine recruitment often involve combat, endurance, perhaps hunting of some extremely dangerous indigenous animal, and for the few who survive the tasks set by the Astartes who are there to supervise, the rewards are beyond estimation.
I can imagine this being turned into an anime where it's just like this exam period of like what it takes to be like a Space Marine. And just like a whole like arc dedicated into just these tests. These, how they like survive them and pass them. And what it requires and how rigorous it is and how deadly it is. My Hero Imperia, yes. See? It's already in the works, Gorka. We're on to something here.
It's difficult to describe just how revered Space Marines are to ordinary citizens of the Imperium. While they wouldn't be directly worshipped, they are certainly individuals with godlike reverence and awe. Many humans in the Imperium will go their entire lives without ever even seeing an Astartes, and they may only arrive on an Imperial planet once in a generation. On some worlds,
I was about to say, if you probably do see an Astartes, it's probably because terrible things are happening to your world, or they're here for some sort of like recruitment process if you're like a home world or something. Yeah, either way, it's probably not a good thing.
they are even somewhat mythical. So for a family on an Imperial world to have their son chosen for Space Marine recruitment and candidacy would be an honour beyond imagination. But from some perspectives, bittersweet, in as all likelihood they may never see them again once they have been accepted, and in very high possibility will probably die in later processes. But it's nonetheless the highest honour to serve the Emperor and the Imperium in this way, and would no doubt lead to adulation, even possible special treatment for families after the fact. Ordinary citizens understand that to be accepted for the conversion to the Astartes, the Emperor's chosen warriors, is nothing short of becoming a demigod. Then again, you could just as easily have been recruited from a hive world full of daily extreme violence, and your gang was just forcibly made to participate in the trials, and you were simply the only one left alive at the end. So that's your flip
brutal.
side of the coin. Pray you never seek acceptance to the Grey Knights. I'll cover that later. Despite all the physical and mental requirements for candidacy, another element is spiritual purity. In the 41st millennium, Imperial society is heavily religious, worshipping the god Emperor, and most importantly, decrying the ruinous powers of chaos. Chaplains and the ecclesiarchy will continually monitor society around Astartes' recruitment sources to ensure that there are no signs of taint by the dark forces of chaos.
That's why you wouldn't want to use a Chaos Gene Seed. Aspirants.
With the easy part over, the selected candidates, now known as aspirants, will begin the ritual process of becoming a Space Marine. This may be a formal process of reciting scripture, or it could involve further trials. These could take place on the homeworld, or result in immediate departure for the aspirant. Each chapter
I feel like it just would be really convenient if all you had to do was just recite a few things and then just leave.
has their own private and guarded initiations. Some of these can be heavily traumatic and are usually significantly harder tests designed to break those who show even the smallest cracks of weakness. These trials for the young aspirants may even include ritual slaughter, scarification, even amputation and bloodletting.
Wow.
It's all designed to prove their commitment, loyalty and unwavering faith in the Astartes chapter. Unsurprisingly, some aspirants do not pass this phase of testing physically or mentally.
It almost simultaneously feels like the Imperium of Man benefits out of like knowing only war and misery and living such a tumultuous and turbulent time, because it continuously fuels whatever it is needed to create these militant, like, soldiers who can go on to fight for the Imperium. Like, why even create it to be like a happy, bright place when you won't even basically create like people of like that mental fortitude or physical caliber that could even go on to serve this like role? Maybe the Emperor is just like shining a dark cloud on the entire Imperium of Man on purpose. Chapters have quite varied cultures. The Happy Marines didn't last long. There was a Happy Marine chapter, or if there was a point in time where there were some Happy Marines, it didn't last long. Shame.
Aspirants will continue periods of testing and examination as well as actual live combat during their period as a recruit for the Space Marine chapter. And some of these trials may be cleverly disguised as coming-of-age rituals, other celebrations some more combat-based. All, though, will be observed carefully by senior members of the chapter and chaplains who will be assessing key traits and behaviours, looking for candidates who fulfill their exacting requirements. Some of these aspirants from Fira worlds or even other worlds may not be truly aware of what Space Marines are, and this innocence may in some way protect them from making overthought errors that cost them later. Still, some chapters actually take little interest in these early stages and will only actually become involved later once aspirants have been further thinned down. The whole
like, it's interesting that like they want to keep them unaware so that it's like the most pure form of an exam to see if that they could pass or not, rather than just tell them, you're taking an exam, now let's see how you perform.
Process is a physical and psychological minefield. Some challenges could be unachievable, while others the simple act of survival is enough to merit approval to progress to the next stage. All the tests put to Space Marine aspirants are designed to test every element of their being to the limit and expose any weaknesses that are present, as well as learn about how they handle and make judgments on situations they are presented with. While the recruitment age for these aspirants is undoubtedly young, it's worth remembering that the nightmare environment of the 41st millennium is undoubtedly very harsh, and so growing up and becoming an adult quickly is something which many learn to do, and so their age shouldn't necessarily dictate your judgment of them based on our current period in time.
That's rough. But like, just me, I guess, imagining a 10-year-old going through this, it's hard to think about. But the fact that they try to like exploit any weakness and then based on that like merit whether they'd be like fit to be Space Marines or not, I think it just like makes me wonder, like, if they do find a weakness, does that mean that you're not good enough to be a Space Marine, or can they work to expel that weakness if they do find it? Like, or is it just like, no, we found a weakness, no pass, and it's like one of the hardest exams in like history? Let's see the trials.
Standard Astartes trials for these young recruits can include knowledge of self. Astartes look at recruits' mental strength equally to the physical. The horrors they will face in their lives as a Space Marine, despite later conditioning, require the strongest character in a recruit to be successful and worthy.
In their formative years,
they may use a chapter
hard.
librarian to impose psychic horrors on a recruit to see if they survive the nightmares they're forced to witness. He may be forced to take drugs and face the worst parts of his own psyche. The stress and trauma of this trial can often physically affect their bodies as well, so in many ways this becomes the ultimate test for recruits. Completion of this trial will undoubtedly fundamentally alter the young recruit forever. Some chapters, like the Imperial Fists, consider this kind of mental testing especially important, but do so by exposing their recruits to literal physical pain, and we use devices like the subtly titled pain glove. These hook into the nervous system of the recruit and inflict horrific pain, but also maintain their consciousness well past what a normal individual could handle.
Oh my god.
The result will either be a mentally toughened but probably scarred individual, or a complete mental breakdown.
But do you want that? Do you want like a scarred individual? I don't think that that's like healthy at all. For like, let's say you're trying to make an Astartes, like I guess they're not like exactly the most picture perfect, sound, mentally healthy person in the world, but creating some scars, I feels like it's almost like you're creating some fissures and possibilities that they might just develop problems later on in like life, even if they do become a space marine. And then it just makes me think of like maybe they're introducing like future weaknesses, because ultimately, even if you were testing them for all of these things and mental fortitudes of them being able to pass all these challenges, they're still weak to chaos, right? Like if they happen to have like a good like psyker or psyche link or whatever to the warp, then it's possible that they will get corrupt one way or another. So it's not they're completely perfect and pure in that regard. I'm pretty sure it's a hard pass if they have a weakness. There's a lot of people to pick from. It's about finding someone who won't be affected by scarring, because the potential warp influences they'll suffer as a space marine require them to be extremely resilient. Okay, so they just have to pass like literally every test with flying colors. Alright, let's continue.
And death. An obvious and standard test for many recruits is exposure. Most worlds of the Imperium have unforgiving environments, and so sending out recruits into these wastes with little to survive with is an easy way to tell who is strong enough as a candidate. Space Marine apothecaries can rebuild damaged individuals, so the test is less of can you survive without consequences, and more simply, can you survive?
Oh my god, just...
Many worlds are severely irradiated, frozen wastes, toxic wastelands, or ashen wastes, where planets have suffered total ecological collapse. Alternately, a planet could also be a literal jungle full of horrific creatures, small and large, ready to tear you to pieces, or just melt your face off. As stated, the test is simple: survive for a set period of time. It will also likely involve some object of crossing a distance from A to B, so as to avoid recruits just digging a hole somewhere and sitting in it until time has elapsed. Some of the tests could well be impossible to complete and are simply assessing who can survive longest or travel furthest before dying or near death. The Ultramarines and Space Wolf chapters are known to favour exposure testing. A fairly self-explanatory trial, recruits are pitted against one another in...
That's interesting as well. It's like knowing which like legions favor which techniques and what they think will exemplify or reveal the traits that they look for in a Space Marine.
One-on-one combat. When the last or last few remain, the assessing Astartes will usually halt the assessment. The type of duel could vary between armed or unarmed combat, consecutive combat, or recruits switching out on completing rounds.
Like
there is one constant though, and that is it's always a fight to the death. Again, apothecaries are able to heal most ordinary human wounds with ease, so these fights are often fairly no-holds-barred brutal affairs. Amputation and heavy trauma being the norm. Unsurprisingly, duels are the Blood Angels trial of choice, but others such as Dark Angels, Imperial Fists and Space Wolves also put this trial to their recruits.
I wonder when they say things like, you know, nothing is barred from these like fights, like can apothecaries like put together like blown off like limbs? Like what if like they pulverize the whole arm? Like we're not just talking about like cleaning it off and then could put back together. Like are we talking about that kind of level of healing? Like, is that within the realm of capabilities of apothecaries?
War is life in the Imperium, and although some worlds know this more than others, planets used for recruitment usually have some form of regular combat going on. This trial is less a trial and more a means of assessing potential candidates. Astartes may have observed headhunting particularly strong champions, or they may watch them from orbit, observing infighting between tribes on Imperial feral worlds. In this trial, recruits are tasked to head out into their homeworld and slay a beast for causing chaos or harm to their world. Many Imperial worlds host highly dangerous life forms or worse, orc infestations. The recruit must go out alone or sometimes in small groups and return with their captured hunt, often alive.
If you pit these people against like Alien or like Predator or things like that, I'm assuming that this universe would probably destroy any threat like that. Like, an alien would probably have no... Maybe it would be no match against whatever these recruits are about to become. You'd win? Dang, Hugh. So confident. I believe it.
With these group hunts though, the nasty twist is that there can only be one successful recruit, so they could turn on each other, break off alone to achieve or steal victory. I personally question the validity of this test. Fighting to the death to show strength over others seems plausible, but setting out in as a group but then betraying other recruits seems to go kind of against the traits Astartes look for in recruits.
I'm wondering the same thing right now, because you would have to be like loyal to your brothers, right? And your chapter and your legion. So like, why even promote infighting where you would have each other like till last man standing? Because then that just goes against like, you'd be so geared towards survival in a bad way. Like, I understand everything else. Send them out into harsh terrains. Send them against monsters and fears they've never seen before so that they will not waver in combat if they ever do see it. But like, this one just kind of seems a little counterintuitive. I agree with Leutin on this one.
Anyway, on returning home, they'll be required to slay their successful hunt in a ritual in front of their community before being led successfully away in the throes of glory. Lastly, the quite vague
like
challenge trial. And this is exactly what it is, some form of probably unsurmountable challenge. This could be to attempt to fight a full-blown space marine in combat.
Wow.
An impossible task, you might imagine, but usually remember, this is the 41st millennium and bizarre occurrences are abound. While the thought of a child fighting a space marine seems like insane, a 10-year-old, yes. Remember, the task is usually to see how they approach it, not necessarily their success. In some extremely rare situations, though, the aspirant may actually beat the space marine challenger.
It feels like, it looks like sanguineous, but I can't tell. I guess I'm not educated enough. I mean, if it was sanguineous, I don't think it would be standing on to the right here. It would be like the person in the center, but...
As completely impossible as this may seem, that individual usually will hold some unusual or rare power and will go on to become a legendary hero of the chapter. The aspirant will also usually be armed, while the Space Marine unarmed and without his power armor. Still, as with most of the former trials, the test here is really about if they can just survive at all, not so much best their
Space
opponent.
Marines are massive even without their armor.
Other arguably more horrific tests though could be non-combat based and test a recruit's strength, speed, mental skill or resistance to toxins. So they might, for example, be forced to drink nightmarish toxic chemicals, lift weights so heavy they break their bones apart, or evade some kind of horrific dangerous trap. Recruits deemed to have succeeded by whatever standards, however unlikely, will then be restored by chapter apothecaries. Ultramarines and again Imperial Fists favour these trials. Clearly, a great many recruits will not survive this stage of assessment, but even those who fail to be accepted but by some miracle survive will usually be heavily respected for having done so, not just by their families and friends, but by the assessing Astartes. Having done no wrong but maybe just not made the cut, these surviving but unsuccessful aspirants who were assessed on their home world may return to their former communities, a rare occurrence. Or they may continue on to serve the chapter as a serf, a menial but loyal servant who takes personal care of, say, a marine's armor.
That's kind of messed up. Imagine surviving like one of these trials and then like somehow you're rare but you didn't make the cut. So now you've seen all these horrors and been through terrible things for the sake of becoming a space marine, but you had to go home with your like tail between your legs, or had to serve these people who are extremely egotistical / have superiority complexes in a way to like do their every whim, but you will like never be them. That's rough.
And weaponry. Those returned to their homes are extremely few, but surprisingly are not perceived as failures.
Oh.
It would be made clear to all that having just survived, they have shown sheer strength and integrity as an Imperial citizen. They would then likely go on to become a strong leader for that world as Imperial Guard, Planetary Defense Force, or some other
That's
leadership.
fair. At least there's some sort of like accolade that comes out of that. It's not just like all for waste and all for naught. Sorry about the trauma. Now go polish my armor. Hey, neophytes. What was I gonna say? Yes. Words. Okay, let's learn about neophytes.
Successful aspirants will now become neophytes. They will move on to the next stage, where they'll begin the early stages of conversion to a full Space Marine with the initial implantation of the gene seed and chemical adaptation of their genetically enhanced organs. This could mean immediate departure with a Space Marine brother to the next phase, or it may be that they are allowed to celebrate in their home community before departure. A very huge moral boost for the Imperial community there, and also to help reinforce Imperial values and loyalty. To be able to say your community gained a successful Astartes recruit is no small thing, and statues, paintings, songs and stories will be told for many years, if not generations to come. Neophytes will be expected to engage in training for combat as well as other mental training, as well as following chapter lore. If a neophyte should break chapter lore through ignorance or unthinkably by deliberately doing so, they will expect severe punishments. A neophyte...
The interesting things about like what I'm learning about Space Marines and Imperium and Ban right now is very like forward or progressive in a way, but it's also very backwards at the same time. It's very like old thinking and old like cultures and traditions, but also with a mix of modern, but only to some degree. It's very strange. It's like very tribal as well.
Breaking chapter lore will not simply be thrown out, they would likely be mind scrubbed, live out their lives as either
You can get mind
best case
scrubbed?
scenario chapter serfs, being menial servants, or worse, forcible amputation and body conversion to life as cybernetic drones and slaves as servitors.
Wait, I gotta listen to that again. I gotta listen to that again.
Other mental training as well as following chapter lore. If a neophyte should break chapter lore through ignorance or unthinkably by deliberately doing so, they will expect severe punishments. A neophyte breaking chapter lore will not simply be thrown out, they would likely be mind scrubbed, live out their lives as either best case scenario chapter serfs,
what
being
chapter
menial servants, or
would
worse,
be and how they differ.
Forcible amputation and body conversion to life as cybernetic drones and slaves as servitors.
That's messed up.
Successful neophytes immediately will begin conditioning to be implanted with their gene seeds and relevant genetic enhancements. Space Marines must be male because the gene seed is only compatible with male hormones and genetics. So no, you won't see female Space Marines.
That makes me sad.
The neophytes also need to be tested for compatibility. I'm always kind of surprised that this doesn't happen before the recruitment trials, but anyway, so they're tested for compatibility otherwise as with organ transplants.
I'm not expecting this to be the most efficient selection process. They probably just go about it as like, okay, put them through the worst conditions possible. If they make it out, then we'll see if they're ready to become this. I imagine this phase is just like not even they think about. There's like all this, like this diagram is very interesting. Like there's zygote deficient, there's all these like different glands and things that they have to like include. Very fascinating. This is what I'm hoping we learn more about with that one surgeon that goes over the entire creation of a Space Marine.
Rejection would be fatal for the neophyte. Even with this testing, it can still happen later down the line. They will then further have their mental strength checked before implantation of the gene seed begins, to ensure that they are in no way compromised by the forces of chaos.
Multiple phases even here. Now on to initiates.
If all these criteria are approved, the neophyte recruit will now become a Space Marine scout, or in some cases a full Space Marine initiate. They will live isolated in the Space Marine chapter's fortress monastery on the homeworld, save for any approved missions. The individual will be tutored on battle methods, tactics, psycho-conditioning, values, and the history of his chapter. The reason these early Marines are titled Initiates is because it is still unknown as to whether they will even survive to the final end process of becoming a full battle brother. 19 organs grown from the chapter gene seed will be implanted to the neophyte initiate. Some are transplants and others are grown in the trainee Marine's body. The gene seed will also adapt and change and grow the individual's body to become the giant size of a space marine, towering over ordinary mortal humans.
I imagine this process is incredibly painful, even just like the growing of organs inside you and it morphing you into a different person. Unless it's like kind of like giving someone steroids and then they just kind of like grow with whatever training they're doing anyways, so it's just amplifying their capabilities, or like something as simple as like giving someone some like creatine or something like that. The no female Space Marines is likely a product of the 80s. On Age of Sigmar side, there are both men and women among the Stormcast, kind of Space Marine equivalent. I imagine, yeah, the lore is too established right now to undo, but kind of a shame because I feel like it could also potentially create some interesting like deviations in the story, and maybe even like hook in like, let's say, women who want to get into space. Space Marine, or just like Warhammer in general, just as like a small little angle or hook there. I'm not really trying to complain, but it's a bit odd to me to have that elaborate explanation of why women can't be Space Marines. It's like, yeah, like we're talking about, Mike, it's definitely a product of its time. It's definitely something that came out of an age where like it probably was catering to the male power fantasy, and not so much anything else. And that's why they like have all these like explanations of why. It's a bummer. Like even to me, I'm just like, okay, that's kind of sucky that they can't be Space Marines. But I can see, like, let's say if you create a character in this world who might be, you know, favoring men, and he's not exactly like a pure mind character. He's not exactly like a pure person with a pure heart. You know, the Emperor is just doing whatever it is to further the Empire, and this is a very, very messed up world. Justifiably, I can understand that. But does that mean we need to create a universe like this? A different question. I mean, there are like battle sisters, so it's not like there aren't women at all that participate in sort of like the role to protect the Imperium, but yeah.
Much of the body chemistry will be fundamentally reworked during this time, and the gene seed contains genetically engineered viral machines which rebuild the body to the template created by the Emperor. Any implant has a potential to fail, and this rejection will automatically end and probably kill the initiate. As if the odds weren't stacked against them already, this further thins down the number who survive to the end of this arduous process. In brief, the 19 implanted or grown organs to become a full Space Marine are as follows.
Wow, this is quite detailed of the different phases. Okay, I will subdue my interest for now and we'll think about this later in another video.
First, a secondary heart to increase blood supply and capacity. It can also pump steroids and extra adrenaline for battle situations.
Okay.
The os modular or iron heart. This strengthens and grows the skeleton of a Space Marine so that his bones will contain a ceramic-based mineral which is added to an initiate's diet. After a few years, the Space Marine skeleton will be exponentially stronger than a normal human. The ribcage will have become fused to a solid bone plate, providing extra protection for internal organs. The biscopia is implanted within the chest cavity, and this increases skeletal muscular development, essentially muscle density. The hemastomen assists in carrying oxygen and nutrients more efficiently throughout the blood. It also assists in regulating the second and third implants. The Larraman's organ is also placed in the chest and manufactures synthetic Larraman cells. These serve like ordinary human blood platelets, but faster and more efficient. When a Space Marine is wounded, they form fully healed scar tissue.
That's what I was thinking about. This must be in the regenerative process that you would want them to like be able to heal wounds a lot faster.
In seconds, preventing hemorrhaging. This ability can make Space Marines appear invincible as they take wound after wound. Anything other than the most catastrophic of injuries is going to leave them still standing. The catalepsion node is implanted in the back of the cerebrum. It allows Space Marines to avoid the need for sleep, entering them into a form of ongoing coma, allowing their brain the ability to systematically recharge by individual parts at a time. This enables them to stay on duty for hundreds of hours. The seventh implant is the preomnor. It functions as a decontamination chamber above the stomach and will analyze ingested materials, neutralizing any organic or inorganic toxins. It also enables the Astartes to eat materials for sustenance that would kill ordinary humans.
Dang,
the omophagia is implanted in the upper spinal cord. It absorbs information through ingested DNA and RNA related to memories. The purpose is to gain tactical or survival information by eating animals or life.
Wasn't that like space wolves or things like that, that like, who was it that ingested like human beings to learn more about them after like they defeated them? Okay, so that's what that was responsible for, that, the omophagia.
Forms indigenous on a planet. In addition to a second heart, Space Marines also have multi-lungs as their ninth implant. 3 in fact. This is to give them extra oxygen absorption in thin air environments. In a toxic environment, their ordinary lungs are shut off to allow the third lung to act as a filter for any necessary toxins. The 10th adaptation is the ocular lobe. It's a gene seed adaptation that enhances eyesight along the optic nerves. This gives increased accuracy of vision and increased low light sight ability. Lyman's ear is not simply better for more accurate hearing, it enables Marines to resist ordinary human dizziness and for them to be able to filter out white noise and sonic attacks.
Wow.
The Sasan membrane allows a Space Marine to enter a state of suspended animation. This can enable mortally wounded Marines to survive until help or an apothecary's arrival. This hibernation period has been known to be able to last for anything as long as half a century. Melanochrome alters the pigments in the skin cells, allowing Astartes to shield himself from dangerous radiation and heat. Different levels of this in effect can cause physical differences between chapters, such as the very pale skin of the Blood Angels or the darker skin of the Salamanders. The Oolitic kidney filters blood to further remove toxins that have been ingested in combination with the 7th organ. It is best not to think of this though like an ordinary kidney, as this organ functions to assist in removing toxins before they have passed through any normal process of absorption, otherwise it wouldn't be very useful. It also helps to regulate the advanced circulatory system and other organs. The neuroglottis in the mouth allows a Marine to biochemically analyse things by taste or smell, or determine if something is poisonous or safe. Despite their advanced organs, this could still be very useful for a variety of purposes, and it can also enable them to track targets, much like a canine. The muconoid is implanted in the nervous system and, if activated through an external treatment, will cause the Astartes skin to secrete a waxy substance. This will cocoon them to protect them in situations of extended suspended animation, even the vacuum of space or other temperature extremes.
Helpful, but ew.
The Betcher's gland consists of 2 glands implanted in the mouth. These allow the Astartes to use their saliva as a corrosive acid when consciously activated. This could enable them to corrode bars if they were held captive, or remove doors from their hinges.
I like that I consciously say, I want to dissolve this handcuff off my wrists. And so you'll secrete that saliva.
Also can assist them in eating difficult to break down substances.
Oh, this is the most fascinating thing.
Some Marine chapters have found that this organ no longer functions or has become less effective over time. The progenoid glands, or the gene seeds, are the critical organs of a Space Marine. They're implanted into the neck and chest cavity and serve as reproductive glands to allow their DNA to be collected upon death and safeguard the continuity of the chapter. Apothecaries of a Space Marine chapter will cultivate germ cells from the progenoid glands to create the 19 organs of a Space Marine, or some of them, because some are grown within the Space Marine themselves. The final organ is the black carapace, otherwise called the interface. This material is implanted under the skin of the chest with the now shell-like ribcage. Fibred bundles then grow inward and interlink with the Space Marine's nervous system. Points for these bundles are pre-cut by apothecaries and form neural connection points. The function of these are to allow a Space Marine to interface with the heavy power armor, or as some would have you believe, the armor's machine spirit. These connections enables faster reaction and maneuverability. Without this, Space Marines would lumber around very much encumbered by the heavy armor they wear. It's worth remembering that this whole process probably sounds heavily traumatic, but consider that it ideally happens when the young neophyte initiates between the ages of about 10 to 12 years old and should be then completed by age 18. Many are going to suffer critical or multiple organ failure during the process. The penalty, or arguably mercy for this, is usually euthanasia, although conversion to a servitor for the chapter is sometimes an option depending on chapters and their needs.
I would say this has probably been the most interesting part of like this whole video, and just like things I've learned about Space Marines in general, just like the actual creation. Surprisingly enough, there wasn't anything to talk about any hormone regulation, whether even it is just to tune up things like maybe highly specific battle sort of like functions. Like the only types of like neurological / hormonal things that we really did see or they went into depth in had something to do with the connection to the power armor and stuff like that. So, and then there was no brain like augmentation at all. It was just like things like to do with our senses, like taste and smell and perception of like toxins and stuff like that, but nothing really on the brain and the mind itself. So like all these like accessory glands added like basically functionality to negate human weaknesses. Like we can't breathe in certain conditions. We can't breathe toxins, so we need a lung to filter it out for us. So very, very fascinating. This is the stuff I'm most curious about. This is the stuff that makes me go, whoa. I didn't think that Leutin was going to go in such depth as well, because I saw that like diagram and I was like, okay, I'm sure we're going to be thinking about this in the next video that we like probably watch. But like, you know, he broke it down, every single organ and what it does and which phase it's like inserted in. Yeah, the Imperial Guard also has a lot of women. That you're right about that, for Senna. Recently, there was some controversy around Games Workshop revealing that they're female Adeptus Custodes, which is seen by many as a retcon. I think that that's just a weird pushback of like the community. Personally, I don't think people should get their and excuse the phrase knickers in a twist to just like think that, oh wow, we have ridden females into this universe. Oh wow, our male fragility is at risk here because we did that. It's like there are literal demons from and bug monsters from beyond the edge of the galaxy, but they can't correct for hormone differences. Well, here's the thing. Primaris Marines have 2 new organs, so why in the love of fuck can a scientist not make a Bechdels gland that corrects for the lack of Y chromosome? Isn't that all going to come down to basically they just are afraid of the technology to make those advancements themselves if it didn't come primarily from the Emperor? Both Tau and Tyranids can also do that. Hi, Greg. Liking the cozy sweater look today? Yeah, we got our first snow here in Sweden, so I gotta bust out the cozy sweater. Things are going okay. I have a bit of a headache, but other than that, it's fine. We're just learning more about Warhammer. How many licks does it take to get to the center of a Blackstone fortress? Yeah, the 80s and 90s seem to have a lot of world building heavy universes, yes, for sure. And I mean, obviously they've fledged it out over time. Generally, yes, it's forbidden to make new things, but there are some admech who are basically like, I could do what I want. But didn't they just justify that within their realm of their universe? One of those is called the aforementioned one, who went and said, I'm going to use trader seed because it's more stable. See if I care. Ooh, badass over here. Robite told him it was heresy, and Call just went, with respect, how would you know if I did? True. Did they document it? Can the Inquisitors tell? Dang.
Again, for those families who never see their sons again, in some cases, it's probably for the best. All they need to know is, he's serving the Imperium. Now, more recently, since the involvement of Belisarius' Call of the Mechanicum, Primaris Marines are a new breed of superhuman Astartes. Under instruction from Robert Gulliman, Primaris Astartes are only created from the gene seeds of loyalist Primarchs. They contain 3 additional organs, and their gene seed is considerably more genetically stable. Gulliman had instructed Call to develop these new
Are
organs with the goal
Ultramarines all
of
like
creating
this?
the Primaris. And their additional organs are the sinew coils. This enables the sinew of a Primaris Astartes to be durametallic, contracting with immense force, gifting them extreme strength and his body further resilience.
Wow.
This increased strength will literally enable them to crush the skulls of their enemies with bare hands. The magnifact, and this small lobe is inserted to the brain cortex. It secretes a hormone to increase the body's growth functions, with the goal of also intensifying further functions of the other implanted organs. Apparently, this organ is in fact half of the immortis gland, the god-maker gland of the Primarchs. For undisclosed reasons, Call was only able to discover the right half of this gland, not the full gland itself. The left half had been fully eradicated from Imperial records by either the Emperor himself or others unknown. And third, the Belisarian...
I can understand why the Emperor might have done this. In a way, like, I can't have anyone deciding to go and make their own Primarchs like I did. We need to delete this information. I can't have, like, for whatever reason, a wedge in human civilization where some of them defect to another Emperor and decide to make their own, like, and then have infighting within. So we delete, we expunge this information.
Furnace. This organ lies dormant and connects to both a Marine's hearts. In times of immense physical stresses, it expels chemicals simulating combat stimulants, increasing the regrowth of tissue, bone and muscle. This is a short-term use organ and requires time to recharge after using.
Has a downtime.
Now, if this incredibly harrowing physical conversion is successful, the neophyte or initiate will have completed the arguably most challenging part of his transformation. However, during these changes, they will still be undergoing some of the most challenging training and assessment regimes humanity had ever known.
Your body is changing as you know it, but also you got to go through these trials. That's the only way we know you'll be able to make it as a Space Marine. Remember Space Marine 2, the upgrades Titus had? Fabius Bile has technically made a Primarch on more than one occasion. Who's Fabius Bile? So Titus had these upgrades, these extra 3. Is that what made him the, the additional Astartes things? He's the one that had all the extra modifications happen when he got injured, right? And not everyone, like, even survives that even after they become a full-fledged Space Marine. Yeah, like a built-in adrenaline shot in emergency situations. Fabius Bile is a Malachi for the Emperor's Children, a traitor legion. He has cloned Horus at least once. Oh, dang. Okay. So, but I thought that, like, how do you clone Horus if, like, Emperor poofed him? I mean, I imagine the Emperor didn't want his gene seed accessible. Can you still clone him?
Psychological and physical conditioning, subconscious therapy, and endless live battle training sessions. Their senses and mental abilities far exceed ordinary humans by the end of this process. Their mental toughness is beyond measure, and an Astartes will essentially ignore pain and environmental conditions. An Astartes will assault enemies who, to simply look upon, would make an ordinary human suffer a complete mental break. Many, through endless conditioning, will develop photographic memories. Much of this round-the-clock therapy will also neutralize any latent character flaws and create stable, highly single-minded warriors. This endless mental...
So basically, their sharpness of mind, their ability to execute strategy and all of that kind of stuff doesn't even come from any, like, modifications they've made to them, but it's purely through, like, the entire training process itself. So, like, they are kind of taught and educated to be the warriors they are today.
And physical indoctrination will also teach and reinforce high respect for authority and to expertly carry out orders. With that said, it's important to remember that Space Marines are not mindless drones or clones. They are individuals, and while always following the rule of command, if a situation warrants it, they are entirely capable of disobeying orders if they believe it to be ultimately necessary. The consequences for this, though, could be, and usually are, potentially highly severe. At the end of this process, the few successful young children who were pitted against one another and survived the ordeals to reach this point will be welcomed as successful young initiates, becoming full Space Marine battle brothers, Imperial Astartes, the greatest warriors in the galaxy. Astartes' aging, though, does seem somewhat random, with some living even as long as 10,000 years.
Wow.
But given the fractured and strange nature of time in the 41st millennium, it can be really hard to put accurate expectancies on this, and many Marines who are not killed may reach at least half a century in age.
Wait, why is time weird in the 41st century?
It's no exaggeration to state that on successfully becoming an Astartes, these men would be far from what you would recognise as human. Their extended lives and
Because
nearly
of the
unbreakable bodies are truly no prize. Their lives from this point on are spent in the sole act of defending humanity and the Imperium of Man. Accepting that their lives will be lost in battle at some point in the future, probably in horrific circumstances, they'll never see anyone they had ever known in their lives again. Families, friends will die far before they even begin to think of such things. Space Marines are the protectors. Humanity in the 41st millennium stands on a precipice. We've known many horrors, disasters, and catastrophes, the ending of many worlds, but the next millennia will be the most critical. Threats surround humanity, some still difficult to gauge just how severe and if we can resist them. Our hope is in the Astartes, and the Imperium of Man, and the Emperor. With the Primarch rulebook Guilliman returned, there is a glimmer of hope in the darkness.
Cut music. I guess this is where copyright kicks in. Whatever they used here. Wow, okay, that was a very expansive video. Very interesting. Very well told as well. And very educational. I think it would be really interesting because like now we're in like the 41st century of like Warhammer. Like what does the 42nd century look like? When do we even get that within our own timelines of like experiencing this universe build, and what is potentially in store for us? I imagine that's like the really interesting like kind of like workshopping that's happening of like, where does this story go, you know, from here? What kind of developments will happen? And even just like, is there a possible reality where like man falls in this story? Because like I guess right in the 41st century you have issues of the warp and the Necron tier and like what they have in store for everyone. Like luckily we're in the 42nd game right now. They just didn't change the name. Oh, I didn't realize that. What if the other Primarchs return? Do they fight for the Regency role? I would know. That was really cool. Like I would say this video was very fulfilling on so many levels in like talking about the intricacies of being a Space Marine, not just like the superficial stuff of like which faction, which color scheme, what makes them who, you know, the faction that they are, but like the actual intense process that goes into making a Space Marine and why they have to endure what they endure and what makes them what they are today. Like rather than just seeing the shining exemplar of a Space Marine today and be like, yep, that's them, they're supposed to be really strong and things like that, but like seeing what they went through to reach those stages puts them into context so much more, which makes me even more excited to watch the video about like a surgeon talking about the realm of possibility of actually creating a Space Marine based off of the knowledge of like what organs and what body modifications and things how they have to go through to actually become this. And so that is the thing that I am most excited about now. That is the thing that I want to watch next, react to next, and dive into even further. So that is where my interest lies now. And I think for me, like navigating this universe is going to be purely based on like what line of thought has been presented to me that is like the most interesting, whether it's like a person, an event in time, a concept, and then I just have to like chase it. And like I think that's the only way that I can go about this. So like I took all the suggestions and like comments about what I should check out next, and then I just like looked at them like cursory glance at them and just like, okay, what like appeals to me from like things I've learned that I want to dive deeper on. So it was like harder to be like, yes, I want to know more about space wolves in particular because I've only learned them on such a superficial like level, but something like ultramarines could be a much more bigger realm of possibility because I at least played as ultramarine in Space Marines, or like the Death Watch would be a chapter worth exploring. And so like it has to be something like that that just gives me a tiny bit more context about what is going to guide me forward in my Warhammer 40k journey.